I wanted to just mention that the 1960 government policy findings yielded differences between developed and developing countries. And so that kind of helped us be prepared for, you know, the range of the kinds of countries we were involved in are both. And then the other thing was the idea of supporting both traditional sport and yet interested in newer sport and leisure configurations in their country. There was also a lot of support for a strong national organizational process and structure, and support for egalitarian measures for inclusion in the policy at the national level. So as I mentioned, all these people, you can see we got quite a research group, and it's out there and it's here, you know, so and it always grow. The other graduate students for other country contacts, I you know, am open for new countries, and so as graduate students come in, I'm always happy to have somebody, you know, get involved. And then most recently, the research group from US and Canada is, you know, functioning, and we'll probably try to start with that data at this point to help us. Okay? And I don't know if, Tom, you want to say anything about the US information at this point, but
Sure.
yeah, just what you did.
Okay. Yeah, it was a very interesting part of it, and as Lynn mentioned, the first phase were, you know, once again talking about kind of the mentorship and a lot of the guidance that I was, you know, lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with Lynn on. First, we went to Washington D.C., as she said, which was really nice from my perspective because it was, you know, obviously a, you know, big situation with a lot of important people we had to, you know, meet, visit, get to know. And as a, you know, graduate student like yourselves, I was a little, you know, unsure of some of my skills and abilities at the time. If you see the picture, I didn't have the grayed out beard and everything else. I've been working on this project for about 9 years, so we were a little bit nervous about some things. It was nice to have Lynn there. Really showed me a lot of the ropes, how things go. Gotten a good idea of the protocol and the whole logistics that take place to put together this type of stuff where we're trying to be 10 or 11 important government officials, you know, driving around town all over the place. So very good stuff there. And that really set the stage for Canada. We went up there, and this time Lynn was not joining us. So that was myself then as the chief operating officer of our little project, so to say. I had Austin Anderson, who most of you guys know. He was also very fresh into our program at the time. So him and I were able to go around, meet a lot of important people, and really follow. It was really a nice protocol, a nice way to do things. And as a result of it, absolutely great data we received. We still have to, you know, do a lot of the write-ups about it. Part of it went into the sport and violence book that, once again, I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to work with Lynn on that, which is nice, you know, building your CV. Not easy as a graduate student to go out there and find a lot of places where you can publish stuff like that. So one of the things I really didn't realize my first year here is it's really up to you guys to go out there and kind of get your experience doing that and seek people that are, you know, interested in what you are and really, you know, stay in their ear, try to get some publications going with them a little bit, because I know lots of people have been here a while and don't get those type of rich publication opportunities, and that's, you know, really going out and finding those mentorship opportunities. Within it though, we had a lot of kind of neat things. You know, I think my favorite parts a lot of times was after the formal interview. We'd have 7 semi-structured questions. We do a little bit of follow-up on them. You know, if there's some deeper things we want to dig into a little bit, we do that a lot of times. But afterwards too, especially the Canadians were very interested in what we were doing in the United States. It's a big mystery for us. As much as we think, you know, what are they doing in these other countries? They're even more concerned about us. They kind of saw this, a lot of the sport policies just being thrown out there, or how is it just the cream rise to the crop? How did you guys develop Michael Jordan? You know, questions like that, where it's like, okay, you know, the United States, we don't have, you know, central policy as much, but there are a lot of gold standards, a lot of truths out there that all these organizations seem to do. They do develop very good athletes in the United States, both at an elite and a non-elite level. So a lot of good times with that, and a great opportunity for graduate students. So if you're thinking about an opportunity with somebody like Lynn or Lynn, wonderful stuff. So.
Yeah, well, I'm not recruiting necessarily. You know, I don't want you to feel like I'm here to recruit, but as the interests are there is opportunity, and that's one thing I want to say. We're trying to identify the role of government policy on local service provision. So as I provided a kind of the mass and the government policy, it's trying to see how that policy that's there, whatever it is, influences what goes on in the local sector. Secondly, what impact did the policy have on environment, youth, and tourism? Those seem to be things that each country we were, you know, in earlier studies that we were looking at, there'd be an emphasis on youth or an emphasis on country recreation or an emphasis on elderly, or like in Australia, it was on the Indigenous society, that in the rural areas and stuff. And then we actually are still in phase 1, and there's actually a phase 2 and a phase 3, which we haven't done, and I'll show you how that goes. This is an ongoing aggregate process, so I've had a chance to write articles on 2 countries, 3 countries, and then sub-themes, political aspects and violence aspects. About six journal articles and a number of presentations that are refereed. And then now we're getting into the cross-cultural part. So as we get information, there's things there to do. The countries were identified for a couple of reasons. Varying levels of sport and leisure programs, but also availability and willingness of government officials to meet with us. And you have to recognize, and when you go through a human subjects approval for this kind of a study, we are in the expedited area, we're not in the exempt area, because we're dealing with government officials. And then, you know, the whole issue with human subjects is there any way they could be identified? So you'll notice, I talked about the countries, but I'm not currently identifying here the countries and the data, with the data. Because you could go back and say, oh, it was this person who said that. And that doesn't necessarily fly. The only way I can use the information, and I can, is getting the governmental permission to use it. And then I'll start breaking out into more of the case study analysis. Criteria, initial identification through the marketing materials helped. And then from there, opportunities, and trying to see, you know, a variety of areas. This has been a multiple method qualitative format with documentary analysis, which are printed materials we can gather, semi-structured interviews, and then what we call context development, which was taking field notes and getting a sense of what that country is about. And the phase 2 and 3, which are lighter, we want a quantitative format with an instrument featuring perceptions of sport and leisure policy. There's already a pilot that we've done in 2 countries of that. And the quantitative format using the COSM, which I referred earlier to as a qualified instrument. It's already good, but if it were converted into other languages and things, we'll still have to pilot it. So we have 2 actual quantitative instruments ready to go. Early themes that came out here were, first of all, cultural models. It was possible to distinguish sort of Asian, European, and Latin approaches. Now, that's only for labeling purposes and something that we'll look in our data to see, but as it was emerging, saying there are some differences here, and these are kind of what they are. Other might give way to, in the Middle East area, maybe a Muslim philosophy or something that impacts, it's a strength of the culture. Also, levels of development, different factors that differentiate policies between the developed and the developing countries. There are different kinds of things. So in smaller countries, there might be just the national down to the local level, and in more developed countries, they have a few levels and regions. Also, identifying targets that reveal emphasis on included and excluded groups, so that often these national policies become campaigns. And then last is leisure constraints. A lot of the research has focused in, that has been done by different countries, and it's part of the documents that we collected, focused in on barriers or constraints for people participating in programs. And so we have a lot of that. Now this is, there is lighter and then darker, but I guess it doesn't show up as well on here for some reason, but I hope you can see it. This is where it is today. Okay, and the phase 1 areas are the areas, the 13 countries are what we have data for that we're in the process of analyzing. I originally used manual coding to do the 2-country, the 3-country, and I have a 7-country comparison for sport and violence. But now we're using in vivo to go in and do I guess a different analysis of this and trying to identify the tree nodes and the linkages between those Frank Vernon has been helping us with that because he's done some work on that. I don't know, Frank, if you want to say anything about it. But he entered in and started working on a lot of data.
It is stalled at the moment.
A little bit, yeah, because we lost our data and we have to start over.
Yeah.
But I have all of the transcripts. I mean, there's nothing wrong there. We just have to re-enter them into the in vivo, so we're okay. Or I think I have all the transcripts. Okay. So I originally visited 3 countries, and then research associates conducted interviews in 5 countries. And then we conducted them at the national level first, then state if it existed, then the local service providers. Documents and observational notes were also obtained during the visits. There were policy professionals at each level, and the local service providers at the local level were determined as a result of the earlier interviews. So it was a little bit of a snowball effect as who we would get at the local level interview. And all had some form of background in training in sport and leisure. Well, we have had so far 111 interviews to date, and the transcripts and documents have been manually coded to yield common themes, which I'll share today. As I said, we're currently adding in vivo. The documents were also used to corroborate, and field notes were also used to give a little bit of a policy development aspect of how that policy relates to the context. And then we also did some member checking and research associate corroboration with our meetings. So I have some tables here that just, again, give some framework for what has been collected so far. And the first thing I wanted to show you, and this represents about half of the interviews, the kinds of people we interviewed and the frequency in 3 of the countries: ministry officials, ministry staff, executive directors, national sporting organization directors, sport club directors, public directors, quasi-public directors, and regional directors. And in Costa Rica, my real thrill was to actually have an interview from the former president of Costa Rica in his home, and he was the one who instituted the ecotourism policy. And in Costa Rica, I added the environmental theme, and he was just fantastic. He could speak English fluently, and he gave me a phenomenal hour-and-a-half interview on everything. It was just really gave me a sense of that country, and I added in that environmental concern. Second thing is from, again, 3 countries, and we have, according to